Hello, I'm Tom Gregory with Youngstown Christian Television. Thanks for joining us on the YouTube channel here and watching the program that you're about to see. Before you do that, if you could hit the subscribe button and join us, that way you'll always be informed of what's going on with Youngstown Christian Television every time we put a new video up on the YouTube channel. Thank you very much. We appreciate that. What's the real story? How did all of this come to be? Was it all by chance, or did something or someone design everything? Can we use science to prove that God created all that we have? How old is our world and the universe? Join us as we learn from our host, William Henry, and discover that the story of the Earth and our universe is really his story.
Welcome to Discovering His Story, a program dedicated to looking at history through the lens of Scripture and integrating the biblical record with the secular record. This is a production of Youngstown Christian Television. The last time we were together, we were looking at the evidences for a young Earth, and we presented 14 extra biblical sources that indicate that the universe is indeed very young, not the billions of years that we're told. Today we're going to be looking at the notion of prehistoric times. Prehistoric times. We've heard that used often, and probably we've all have an idea of what that means. But what does prehistoric really entail? Well, if it's prehistoric, that means it's before we have any records. So prehistoric times would mean that those times, the evolutionists say, thousands of centuries of time in which man existed and yet did not write anything or leave anything behind that we could tell of the events that may have occurred. So those are the times when maybe we are told that there are, our ancestors were chimpanzee-like, they were apes flying through the trees. And we have this idea of ape men. Were there really transitional forms that are in our ancestry of apes transitioning to being human beings? Well, one of these transitional characters is said to be Neanderthal man. Now, the spelling of it used to have an H, and we all pronounce it Neanderthal. But recent years, that H has been eliminated for reasons I don't know. And so we now pronounce it Neanderthal. And this was an article that I found in a publication intended for school students. And I want you to notice the third column. Let's look at the paragraph beginning with the final chapter. This is a review or an explanation of this work, the Neanderthals necklace. It says the final chapter deals with the period of Neanderthal-Cro-Magnon coexistence, which ended with the disappearance of the Neanderthals. Scientists now have a better idea when the Neanderthals disappeared, but it is not clear why or how. And then I thought this was a particularly interesting excerpt from the book. The Neanderthals, on the other hand, were not intellectually like our 2.5-year-olds. Actually, their physiological development was very similar to ours. To begin with, their maturity at birth was similar to that of a modern child. Like us, they were born much less developed than our chimpanzees. By the age of 2.5, they had gone through essentially the same developmental stages leading to adulthood that we have. And they continued growing and learning from adults throughout childhood, just like we do. As adults, they acted consciously and purposefully when they manufactured stone tools, built fires, and buried their dead. So what are we to conclude from what they've said about Neanderthal? They were just like us. Not a missing link. They were just like us. In fact, the caricature of the Neanderthals was of a person with a lot of hair and bent over, dragging a club behind them, maybe even dragging a woman behind them by the hair. But further research discovered that the reason these bones of the Neanderthals indicated people that were bent over is because the particular bones that they found were of people with arthritis, just like some of us. Arthritis is what made them look bent over, and they actually were as human as any of us. We've been given these kinds of illustrations in our textbooks. It's looking at the development of man. You see, this says that there are three key figures in the story of man's ancestors living 25 million years ago. Proconsul had ape-like teeth and arms and the body, face, and hands of a monkey. It ran on all fours, but probably stood erect for short periods. What might we conclude about that being? It was some form of an ape. If it looks like an ape, it smells like an ape, it walks like an ape, it's probably an ape, not an ancestor of humans. Look at the next one. And this is a hard one to say. Australopithecus lived about 750,000 years ago, they say. Had an ape-like face, but a larger jaw and higher brow than apes. It possessed man-like limbs and probably walked semi-erect. And then look at the last one. About 500,000 years ago, apes finally began to learn how to run. The Pithecanthropus had man-like but oversized teeth and a lower brow and larger brain than the earlier hominids, and its posture was erect. Now, what are we to make of these so-called missing links, these ape-like creatures that are supposed to be like modern man? Well, I'm going to take you through a presentation that was developed by Mike Riddle at Answers in Genesis and entitled Facts About Ape Men. So let's look at that together. The topics of this are going to be, first of all, a history of ape men, and then two case studies, the Neanderthals, mentioned previously, and Australopithecines and Lucy. You've all heard of Lucy. We're going to talk about her. And then how evolution actually hinders critical thinking. We're going to look at how things change. First of all, the history of man. If we look at it from the evolutionary perspective, it begins with the assumption that man has evolved from ape-like creatures. So pick your relative. Which one appeals to you? The Bible, however, teaches that God created man. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female. So from the very beginning, man was human, male and female, in the image of God, not an ape-like creature that developed into man. But our school textbooks disagree. Look at this example from a biology textbook. It says, look closely at your hand. You have 5 flexible fingers. Animals with 5 flexible fingers are called primates. Monkeys, apes, and humans are examples of primates. Primates most likely evolved from small insect-eating, rodent-like mammals that lived about 60 million years ago. Another textbook says this, but all researchers agree on certain basic facts. All of them, they say. We know, for example, that humans evolved from ancestors we share with other living primates, such as chimpanzees and apes. Even the chimp disagrees. Because they're assuming that because there are some similarities between humans and primates, that therefore they have a common ancestor. And that's not necessarily so. God is able to use many of his creative ideas in more than one kind of creature. And so he has. Here's one example of a supposed ancestor of man called Piltdown Man. You can see here the arrow points to the segment of the lower ape-like jaw and a segment of a human skull. That's what they had to go on. And from that they constructed Piltdown Man, which the New York Times said that by this the Darwin theory was proved true. It was featured in textbooks and encyclopedias. And in 1953, scientists studied the bones. And the truth is, it was a fraud. The bones really were 600-year-old bones, not hundreds of thousands of years old. In 1922, fossil evidence was discovered, and they called it Nebraska Man. And it was used to support evolution in the famous 1925 Scopes trial, sometimes called the Scopes monkey trial, that took place in Tennessee, where the law had been passed saying that you were not allowed to teach evolution in the public schools. And so the whole nation gathered through its newspaper reporters to see what would become of this battle between creation and evolution. This was used as evidence. The claim was that this Nebraska Man was a 1 million year old intermediate link, one of our ancestors. The truth, however, is that all they had was an extinct pig's tooth. Doesn't take much. They are very creative. The imagination of evolutionists is highly used, highly exact. They can construct a whole man out of an extinct pig's tooth. Next we come to Ramapithecus. This was in the 1930s, and what they found is indicated here in the picture and the arrow. Here's what they drew. How do you get from the picture on the left to the picture on the right? Pure imagination. That's all there is to it. And yet you'll see these kinds of illustrations in almost any natural history museum that you go into throughout the country. Time magazine, 1977, said Ramapithecus is ideally structured to be an ancestor of hominids. If he isn't, we don't have anything else that is. Well, guess what? The claim that these were 14 million year old intermediates between ape-like creatures and humans was not the truth. The truth is that in 1970, a baboon living in Ethiopia was discovered with the same dental structure and similar morphological features found on Ramapithecus. Ramapithecus was then dropped from the human line. So goes the only link we had. But they don't stop. Piltdown Man was a hoax. Nebraska Man was a pig. Ramapithecus was an ape. What about the dates? In each case, the date or age was completely wrong. Now we're going to look at two case studies, the Neanderthals and then Lucy. The Neanderthals were originally drawn like this, based on very little evidence. First found near Dusseldorf, Germany in 1856. It was constructed to look ape-like. The brain capacity, however, was about 200 cc's larger than an ape, and the initial construction was discovered to be wrong. Instead, the skeletons they found really should be reconstructed to look like the man on the right. Not very ape-like, looks just like a man. In fact, they used jewelry, used musical instruments, they did cave paintings, they were capable of speech, and they buried their dead. How ape-like is that? In Marvin Lubinau's book, he says most anthropologists recognize burial as a very human and a very religious act. But the strongest evidence that Neanderthals were fully human and of our species is that at 4 sites, Neanderthals and modern humans were buried together. Here's a drawing of a Neanderthal fossil purchased at the souvenir counter at the museum in Berlin, giving an ape-like appearance. I wonder if you notice anything about this drawing. If you've taken anatomy, you might. The lower jaw is over an inch out of the socket. So they reconstructed this skull to fit their theory, not according to the facts. And in reality, if you put the jaw in its proper place, it has a flat human appearance, not a projected ape-like appearance. So, Neanderthal anatomy, there's a thick brow. He was had a stocky body and short extremities. But he's still a man. The common dates for the Neanderthals are 130,000 to 30,000 years ago. The Neanderthals existed for about 100,000 years, they say, 2,500 generations. And so from that time period, you could expect that they would have grown from around 300 million to 6 billion people, 100 generations. So where are the fossils of all these Neanderthals? There should have been over 50 billion Neanderthals that lived during this time, and yet the fossils are not there. In 1964, Neanderthals were listed as a subspecies of humans. In 1977, Neanderthals were given to believe were a separate species based on the DNA. The results of mitochondrial DNA show clearly that Neanderthal was not our direct ancestor, unlike earlier hypotheses made by some paleoanthropologists. So how was this comparison made? 1,669 modern humans were compared with one Neanderthal. How accurate is that going to be? When compared to modern humans, there were 22 mtDNA substitution differences. Between modern humans, the range is from 1 to 24 mtDNA differences. So, not very different. What does this mean? There are a few modern humans who differ by 2 substitutions more than the Neanderthal individual. In other words, you could find humans on the planet today that have more of a variance from most humans than the Neanderthals did. Therefore, using evolutionist logic, these people are separate species, not human. Plus or minus 8% of the people here watching this program are not human. You're a subspecies, if you use their logic. So the protruding brow ridge, stocky body build, short extremities, isolated population of people. They lived in a cold, harsh climate, but they're 100% human. Here's one reconstructed from a skull found in France. And I don't know, I've seen people that look similar to that, haven't you? Now we'll look at Lucy and the deception propagated upon all of us. We're going to look at what was found, ask the question, did Lucy walk upright? And according to the book put out by Donald Johanson and Maitland Eddy, they say Lucy is the beginning of humankind, our oldest human ancestor, they say. Here's an artistic conception of the kind of being that Lucy was. And what do you notice about this picture? You know, they didn't have cameras. In fact, all they have are some bones. So the artist that rendered this had certain things he wanted to get across. So what do you think of when you look at this picture? Note the contemplative gaze. The human hands, those are not ape hands. And the use of tools, trying to convince us that Lucy was indeed a human ancestor. The artist said, I wanted to get a human soul into this ape-like face to indicate something about where he was headed. Oh, he was headed toward humanity, apparently. Well, what was found? Lucy was discovered in 1974. About 40% of the fossil was found. It was claimed to be 3.5 million years old. It was claimed that Lucy was bipedal, that she walked upright. And so from these bones, they constructed this image. But notice the feet. The feet aren't there in the skeleton, but they've constructed feet anyway that look remarkably like human feet. But there's no similarity in appearance to humans from the skeleton. The long arms of the skeleton are identical to chimpanzees. The jaws are similar to chimpanzees. The upper leg bone is similar to chimpanzees. Lucy's legs were very ape-like. The brain size overlaps that of chimpanzees. The large back muscles for tree dwelling are there, and hands similar to pygmy chimpanzees. The feet were long and curved, not like human feet. Did Lucy walk upright? Well, to determine if Lucy walked upright, 3 areas of anatomy were examined: the rib cage, the pelvis, and the leg and foot bones. First, the rib cage. Ape ribs are conical shaped. Human ribs are barrel-like. You can see that from the illustration. Well, what were Lucy's? Peter Schmid says, I noticed that the ribs were more round in cross-section, more like what you see in apes. Human ribs are flatter in cross-section. But the shape of the rib cage itself was the biggest surprise of all. The human rib cage is barrel-shaped, and I just couldn't get Lucy's ribs to fit this kind of shape. Try as he might. Brad Harab and Bert Thompson say, in Lucy's case, her ribs are conical like those found in apes. Here's a chimp versus human pelvis. You can see there's a huge difference between the two. Well, which do you think Lucy's turned out to be? The fact that the anterior portion of the iliac blade faces laterally in humans but not in chimpanzees is obvious. The marked resemblance of AL288-1, Lucy, to the chimpanzee is equally obvious. It suggests to us that the mechanism of lateral pelvic balance during bipedalism was closer to that in apes than in humans. Lucy's pelvis is wrong because it's very ape-like. So, what they do, they tried to fix Lucy with a power saw. They try to make her conform to human standards. This is science? Here's the knee joint, which you notice is 15-degree carrying angle. Humans are 9-degree, gorillas 0-degree, chimpanzees 0-degree. An orangutan is 9-degree, and a spider monkey 9-degree. What nice feet you have. St. Louis Zoo replica of Lucy shows her with very human feet. But which footprint is human? Easy to see, isn't it? These footprints were discovered in 1978 in Tanzania. The footprints were dated at 3.5 million years old. Who made these footprints? Humans or apes? Well, here's the footprint. Indistinguishable from those of habitually barefoot Homo sapiens. Anatomist Dr. Charles Oxnard has shown that the big toe actually sticks out as in chimpanzees. Once again, Louis in the St. Louis Museum, is her big toe sticking out? No. Professor Betsy Schumann, evolutionist expert, admits that the statue's feet probably are not accurate. But when asked whether the statue should be changed, she says, absolutely not. It's got to fit the narrative, not the facts. Evolution must use bad science to deceive people. Some 3.7 million years ago, the textbook says, several bipedal human animals of the species Australopithecus afarensis left footprints in damp volcanic ash in what is now Tanzania in East Africa. 1987, Charles Oxnard, a computer analyst, examined it. 1992, the American Journal of Physical Anthropology said, walk like chimpanzees. In 1993, it was reported this locking mechanism was not developed. 1994, a story of the hip and thigh, it was examined. Did she walk upright? The Australopithecines known over the last several decades are now irrevocably removed from a place in the evolution of human bipedalism. All this should make us wonder about the usual presentation of human evolution in introductory textbooks. So there are 10 unique characteristics of an ape such as Lucy. We won't have time to go through them all, but we can look at the textbooks and see how they portray the eye socket, the flatter face. Is it possible for a Lucy-like creature to evolve into a human? Natural selection selects this mutation, they say, over any existing genes or other detrimental mutations that code for this function. The mutation is inherited by offspring. This process must add new information, which is not possible. Natural selection, can it cause one kind to become a new kind? No. Natural selection only works with existing information. And so there's many human variations among human beings. This is an example of genetic variation and natural selection and not evolution. Mutation is generally not beneficial. You would have to add information to change what a creature is. And all the reading I've done in the life sciences literature, I've never found a mutation that added information. These are scientists that disagree with the evolution model. You hear sometimes it's said that scientists believe in evolution. Well, here are just a few that don't. Evolutionists ignore the scientific evidence. They create misleading pictures to support evolution. They practice censorship. The scientific evidence supports Lucy was an extinct type of chimpanzee. All the evidence supports created after their kind, made in the image and likeness of God, which is what we're told in Psalm 139, that we are remarkably and wonderfully made. Thank you for joining us today for this look at discovering his story, and I hope that you'll come back again next week as we go further into the prehistoric and historic times at the very beginning.
What's the real story? How did all of this come to be? Was it all by chance, or did something or someone design everything? Can we use science to prove that God created all that we have? How old is our world and the universe? Join us as we learn from our host, William Henry, and discover that the story of the earth and our universe is really his story. Okay, tax time again. What's it going to cost me this year? Well, that seems high. That's a lot more than I thought. Is everyone this expensive? Here's a local company. Let's check them out. They've been around for 15 years. Average fee less than $79. I'm going to tax 29. They have an office near me.